So in this video, I want to go through my notes for Wing Leader by James Edgar Johnson or Johnny Johnson. So this book is basically his personal memoirs of the Second World War. Uh, Johnny Johnson was the leading Spitfire ace for the Royal Air Force in the Second World War. And what I found interesting in this book was that this is the first memoirs of a fighter pilot that I've read where we actually get to see the operational side of fighter combat in the Second World War. I'm pretty sure there probably is like other memoirs which go like that explain and describe the things that I'm gonna focus on in this video that I'd like to talk about. But I have this is the first book that I've read that has it. So I've read like many memoirs from German fighter pilots, American fighter pilots, British fighter pilots, but they were all like section leaders or flight leaders. A couple of them were squadron leaders as well. But this is the first time that I'm reading from the perspective of a wing commander. Um, so yeah, we'll get into that. So the first part of the book is basically, general memoir stuff, where he was born, how he joined the Air Force, his training. Here's an interesting thing. As a pilot, Johnson doesn't seem to be a very good pilot, and I think this is like a quite a common trend that I've found. Like, some of the best fighter aces of the war when they were starting out, like they weren't considered good pilots at all. I think quite a few of them like almost failed or couldn't pass medical exams. Some of them like almost didn't get admitted into Air Force. Of course, these are all different profiles from all the different nations that fought in the war, but it's from my point of view, that's what I've seen like a common thing. Um, yeah, Johnson as a pilot, he almost fails a couple of times, and a couple of his instructors kind of like say, you got no future, kid. Go do something else. Um, but he doesn't get to take part in the Battle of Britain. He he is in the Air Force and he is flying Spitfires whilst the Battle of Britain is going on, but he's not posted to an operational squadron during the fight. He only starts seeing combat after the Battle of Britain is fought. So he gets assigned to the Tangmere Wing, I believe that was the name. I might be getting the names and the squadron numbers wrong, but basically he's under the tutelage of Douglas Bader, who's another famous fighter pilot because he had no legs. And from here, we get to see because Bader is one of the very first wing commanders. I should double back here a little bit. It seems to me like doctrinally, the way that well, at least the way I've studied and the way that I've seen other people talk about this topic, we seem to have this idea that in the past, fighting forces and organizations, whether it be Army, Navy, Air Force, and going back all the way to ancient times, there isn't really a formal doctrine or tactical handbook. Like today, everything is systemized. Everything has operating procedures. Everything has manuals. We have like bullet points, this that, and the other. What I found is that in real total war scenarios, and not even in total war scenarios, even like minor conflicts in the past, there is no such thing as like a handbook. One thing that popped out for me here from his memoirs is that he points out that during his time, as like towards the end of the Battle of Britain, even then, uh, a lot of fighter pilots, as they're getting posted, don't know anything about air combat. And as you go through it, you realize that their understanding of fighter combat is very rudimentary, and it's all like hands on, and it's not what we would consider today to be scientific. Dogfighting, as we know it today, didn't exist back then. Like whenever we hear the term dogfighting now, we think air combat maneuvering, basic fighter maneuvers, that sort of stuff. Yes, they did have the concept of basic fighter maneuvers like Immelman or Split S. Yes, they had like understanding of all these kind of maneuvers, but air combat maneuvering where you have like an understanding of energy maneuverability. I mean that they didn't have this understanding because these are all modern inventions from the 1960s and onwards. Back then, it all came down really as to like what the speeds were of aircraft and engine performance at this altitude and what. And they understood that you could change altitude into airspeed and airspeed back into altitude. But the way that they talk and describe things, you can tell that their understanding of what we know as like the scientific discipline of like dogfighting, that there are certain moves when you're in a certain position that you must take because this is the best way to get in behind the enemy. That's not how the way that they thought about it. um, I know there was another book regarding the development of the energy maneuverability theory. It was looking into John Boyd, who was a colonel in the 1960s, and the way that John Boyd, he's depending on which part of the internet you're on, he's either like a genius or he's an idiot, and he's either like famous or infamous. But one thing we can't deny about Boyd is that he does write the first real modern tactical handbook regarding fighter uh, maneuvers and combat tactics. And it is mentioned in one of his biographies that, before he came along, uh, fighter pilots prior to the 60s, they they treated air combat as an art form. Like, there was no codex or manual that described all these things that we take for granted now that we talk about. Um, and I just like to bring up that the flight sim community, I think they have a pretty big part in like perpetuating what I guess you could call like anachronism. We're putting modern interpretations and modern theories, and we are imprinting them on the past a lot. So when you like, well, at least in my experience, when you talk to enthusiasts about military aviation and air combat, even specifically on past events, World War II, Korea, World War One. I think there is like a basic fundamental misunderstanding of air combat. The way that we treat things now, um, as we're studying these things, it's coming from the wrong point of view. We're reading history backwards, kind of. Um, uh, Especially with like dogfighting overall, we seem to think that the Spitfire is like this amazing dogfighter, and that Spitfire pilots would go in and utilize their massive advantage in turning ability against enemy aircraft, and then that's how you fight. Because that makes sense, right? You want to use the strengths of your aircraft against the weaknesses of the enemy aircraft, and now modern theory we have one circle, two circle theory. Um, Energy maneuverability, this, that, and the other. But back then, the way it's described here, it's very rare to find yourself in a one-on-one dogfight situation against an enemy aircraft where you utilize such strengths against such weaknesses. It's not actually practical at all. Second World War air combat is the way it's described here by Johnson, and from the research that I've done from other sources that I've read so far, is that Second World War is not dogfighting. It's not the dogfighting era at all. It's the era of team fighting. The Second World War, in terms of air combat, is like massive formations of aircraft going at each other over battlefields that span miles of airspace. And here, especially from the wing commander's perspective, you get to see, um, because Johnson is not just the commander himself, he's not just a good leader, he's also a crack shot fighter pilot. He shoots down the most enemy aircraft in the Spitfire. He is the leading Spitfire. You get to see that the number of like dogfights that we would see it today, where he's going into one circle or two circle fight, is like very rare. Most of the time, it's got nothing to do with that at all. Most of the time, most of the kills that occur, it's all due to positioning. Especially even though flying a Spitfire, it's all about altitude, gaining initiative, bringing the most amount of force and concentrating it on the enemy, and having a positional advantage. That's how Johnson describes all the fights that he gets into, and he explains in detail some of the major actions in which he fights. This is how as the fighter pilots they think. just because you have a great advantage and strength in the maneuverability, doesn't seem that that was their go-to tactic or strategy when going to air combat. It's more like how the descriptions of what we know as the American form of like energy fighting and going in boom and zoom. Um, it seems to be the same. It seems to be almost exactly the same. Dogfights are like very very quick, usually, and especially in one of the very early circus operations. I think that's what they call them, as the offensive fighter operations going over into enemy territory. There was a description of like a friendly squadron that got into action, and I think they jumped an enemy squadron, and an enemy squadron jumped them, and basically they got to make one pass on the targets, and then they broke up, disengaged, and ran for home. And that was it. That's the fight. And Johnson gets into a couple fights that are like that as well. You only get like one pass, maybe even two, and then you get out. The fights where it's a prolonged engagement where you're turning for like multiple moves in and out of each other's gun sights, those are very rare. It's not common. Those are the exceptions, but yet this is what most of the public's knowledge and viewpoint of Second World War air fighting is, because these are the exciting stories, I suppose. This is the kind of stuff that everybody is more interested in because it's flashy and it's cool. But that these are the exceptions. This wasn't the norm at all. So let's see. If we get to, I believe, if you get about halfway through, I think chapter 9, 10, somewhere around there, this is where Johnson starts getting his kills, and he starts, I think he already is a squadron leader by this point. That was the other interesting thing, is that regarding climbing up the ranks, it's all about flying with your section leader and then just sticking with him throughout the fight. I think in the very early battles, Johnson admits that he doesn't know what the hell is going on half the time. This goes back to the topic of situational awareness. Johnson has the right stuff, right? In the Ace Factor of Mike's pick, he goes into detail about the the benefits of situational awareness and how situational awareness isn't really a skill that can be developed. It's either you have it or you don't have it. And if you do have it, sometimes you need to get experience before you can fully unlock that potential. But there are a lot of pilots who just don't have it, and no matter how much experience they get, they're just not going to be able to perform to the level of to the level of aces, basically. And it sounds like a little bit unfair, but that's just how it is. Um, Not everybody can be the ace fighter pilot. And in Mike Spick's book, the Ace Factor, he goes in depth even to like how modern day air forces, they try to ignore, or they try to mitigate this fact of being a fighter ace with improved advancements in technology. But even at the end of his book, he cites exercises which the modern air forces conduct, in which you're just using missiles and radars, and you're fighting from like beyond visual range. Even with a fully technological environment like that, where the human factor is being reduced as much as possible, even in these exercises, there's always going to be one dude that excels above everybody else. There's one dude who's getting all the kills, and everybody else is just there to be shot at or to tag along for the ride. Um, it's a trend that is apparent throughout all of air combat from the First World War to the modern day. And I'm pretty sure I was trying to look into it, economic principles regarding this trend. I don't know what the exact names were of all these theories and principles, but you see this trend in other forms and aspects of life, that even if you have a completely level playing field, there's only going to be a couple of dudes who end up doing all the work or doing all the, hard carrying the team, basically, making all the money. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And I agree with Mike Spick's viewpoint that it's situational awareness and that it's an ability that you're born with. It's just a matter of unlocking it if you are born with it or if you're naturally talented. But I think I've gone off on a tangent too much on that. Let's go back to Wing Leader and Johnson's combat operations. Johnson is not just a great leader. You can see certain stories that he tells, the way that he manages egos within a squadron, and how he just manages a squadron, how he leads a squadron. Basically, there's a lot of good stories and a lot of good leadership principles that you can learn by reading this book, How to Be a Good Leader. But regarding the operations, he has an amazing mind for tactics and operations. Once he becomes a wing commander, his ability to understand what happened in a dogfight, go back to base, and then immediately act upon it, right? Like the moment these guys come back, they've always got the debriefing. They've always got all the wingmen and the flight leaders all get together, and they all try to get the story together. It's like what happened in the fight, who shut down who, and all these things that we can improve. But Johnson always takes the extra initiative that after that's all done, he will then go over to either his superiors or his peers. So like there was an interesting story regarding fighter directors, because when they are conducting offensive fighter operations in enemy territory, the wing commander or squadron leaders, they need to be in contact with the fighter director that's back in England with the long range radars, and they need to work together because the dude with the radar back home, he's the one that can see the whole picture. He's the one that can plot where all the different squadrons are, where all the different wings are operating, and also detect the enemy when they're taking off, how many and where and what position. And basically, the wing commander and the fighter director, I don't know I can't remember what the exact term is that the British use for the fighter director. I know the fighter director is more of an American term. I was reading US Naval Combat Tactics. So I'm getting my terms mixed up here, but you get the point. But basically, as the wing commander, you're part of a team. Basically, you need to work with the fighter director, who's going to give you all the information, and then you as the wing commander need to input all the information that he's telling you into your head, make tactical calculations, and then make a decision. And there were at least three good like major battles that Johnson writes down here, like the whole process that occurs. And that was like a part of air combat that I had no idea existed in the Second World War. It's a very, very complex moving system with like a lot of command and control systems that I quite frankly thought wasn't gonna be like possible back then in the 40s, because my experience with the wargaming online today, despite the fact that we have all this knowledge available to us and all the technology, with all the different communication apps and channels, we're not even capable of like 1% of what it is that these guys back in the 40s were capable of achieving. It's an interesting thing to observe, and I probably should write a research paper on that, to be honest. That would be very interesting. But going back to Johnson here, yeah, it was a very, very complex kind of system that they have, and it really does come down to good leaders and competent command officers in the air, because to be able to understand the situation on that larger scale and then make a decision according to that information, and then shoot down enemy aircraft, that is quite frankly pretty amazing. So let's see here. I'm going through my notes. Sorry. Um, okay, there are a couple of dogfights. There was one that I remember is against 190. They were still flying Mk5 Spits, and this was the period in which the Focke-Wulf 190 enters the war, and it gives a lot of trouble to the Royal Air Force offensive fighter operations. The Mk5 Spit is completely outclassed by the 190. There is a dogfight that occurs, Spitfire versus a 190, and it's a turning engagement, like a classic air combat maneuvering scenario, one on one. And Johnson actually loses the fight. The thing about Johnson is that he never gets shot down. He receives ground fire at one point in his career, but it doesn't like bring him down into enemy territory. It doesn't like actually get shot down. He gets hit once in his career. But against this fight with the 190, and he describes it in very great detail, he loses the turning engagement, and then he needs to disengage, and it's like a really, really intense fighting retreat to try get back to his lines. And I think he flies over a friendly destroyer, which almost shoots him up instead of the bandit on his tail, because identification, friend or foe, that kind of tech is still in the very early development at this time. And inter-service operation and coordination during the Second World War, Air Force and Army and Air Force and Navy, that's all still being developed at this point. So he gets out alive, doesn't get hit by the 190, but it was a very interesting fight. It was very interesting account of that. He never. Yes, okay. So going back to Doctrine and Tactics, uh, like I said, now if we go through the sources, right, we can always find that there's going to be a manual or something. But once you actually look at the accounts of what these pilots did during the war, you find, especially here with the Royal Air Force, with the Americans is slightly different. Um, your tactics and doctrine changes from squadron to squadron. It's all dictated by squadron leaders, or in the very early days of when the wing system is being implemented, the wing commander, they get to dictate what kind of tactics they want to run. So, what kind of formations, what kind of tactics, and like the doctrine changes from leader to leader, basically. And during the very early stages of the battle, Britain, we always like the traditional way that it's taught is that the Royal Air Force has outdated formation and tactics. They're flying in three ship VIX sections in rigid wing formations, going to combat this, that, and the other. But Johnson writes down that it wasn't always like that. Once certain pilots figured out that this was not the way to fly and fight anymore, because the Germans were had far superior tactics and much more experience in air combat. Depending on which squadron you were in, individual squadron leaders just made and took the initiative to change their tactics. And during the Battle of Britain itself, you have instances of fighter squadrons in the Royal Air Force already adopting finger four formations and uh, two-man element and two-man sections. Um, that certain things like that development also occur within Johnson's squadron after the Battle of Britain as they're starting their offensive fighter operations. So yeah, that was very interesting thing to read there. It goes hand in hand with the other publication that I'm reading, the Long Reach for the Eighth Fighter Command, which is the compilation of notes by Second World War U.S. fighter pilots in the Eighth Air Force. During the mid-war, there was an order given out to ask all the experienced fighter pilots to jot down their tactics and put it all into a manual so they could give it to new pilots as they were getting forward deployed to give them an edge, hopefully. And in that document, which is very interesting, you can tell that even though fighter pilots were all in the same like organization unit, so like in the same wing, but different squadrons, you can see that they all had their own different tactics and their own approaches to air combat, even if they were flying the exact same aircraft. There are some contradictory statements here where one squadron would do this in a certain situation, but the other squadron doesn't agree with that. Not that they have conversations about that. It's just that reading the two accounts side by side, these are the contradictions that occur. And at the same time, you also see that there's a lot of similarities in their tactics, but it's written and described in such a way as that they weren't shared. It's more like they all were developed in parallel or word of mouth. One squadron who gets into a fight a certain way, and then they develop a certain tactic that then just disseminates throughout the wing. And then since it works so well, then everyone else adopts it. But it's not like it was a written down thing before the war or prior to the war or during the middle of the war. It's like a continuous development that occurs throughout the war, and everyone develops it or adopts it at different times depending on where they are and what kind of operations they're doing. Very interesting stuff. Probably should do more research into that as well. So yeah, that's that regarding fighter operations. Um, what else do we got? I think that's basically all the kind of stuff that I wanted to talk about here regarding this. There's a lot of other minor details regarding fighter operations that Johnson talks about. He also talks about all the other pilots that he meets. He meets a lot of like really famous pilots. Is George Burling, the Canadian fighter ace, the aerial sniper. He at one time was actually assigned to his squadron, but he never got to command him because he got promoted and transferred. Canadian fighter pilot Buck McNair is a dude who like lost a lot of his vision in a shoot down. His aircraft got shot down and it caught fire, and the fires basically hurt his eyes and his vision, but he hid it from everybody and then still flew combat operations. He meets Wing Commander Guy Gibson, the Dam Busters commander, at one point. Pretty sure he meets Churchill like once or twice, I think. um, a bunch of other characters like American Spitfire pilots. He meets them as well. Oh, there's one good story regarding the first time that Spitfires were, well, no, in his experience at least. I don't know whether it was the first time that in the whole war this was the case, but the first time that he flew escort for B-17s, leading a Spitfire squadron. They're flying escort for the B-17s, close escort. 109s come in and start attacking the fortresses, and the British they're going in and again trying to get stuck in with the fighters who are getting stuck in with the bombers, and they start getting shot at by the fortresses because at this point in time there was no real coordination or doctrine regarding like what the escorts are supposed to do when this happens. Everyone's got their own way of thinking, and there's no direct comms with the bombers at this point in time. Actually, I'm not entirely sure what all the different forms of communications were utilized during the Western theater of operations. I know that for the Pacific theater, um, the radio channels were very limited. They only had like a handful of channels, and depending on the point of the war, later on in the war, they had multiple channels that you could communicate and coordinate your combat air patrols for the carrier. Have multiple different sections all at once, all operating simultaneously, and not clog up the channels. I know the Navy, U.S. Navy, did a lot of work on that, but for this instance here, they couldn't communicate with the bombers directly, and basically the Spitfire started getting shot at by the fortress gunners. And after that escort mission was done, Johnson immediately goes to the bomber base that they escorted, and then goes and talks to them immediately, right? So he doesn't like go and like wait for commanding officers or his superiors to like tell him what to do or anything. And this is a very common theme that occurs throughout his memoirs. Once he identifies as a problem, he just goes and fixes it. He just doesn't care like what the hell, whose authority or command he's crossing or any lines that occur to him, and he doesn't care. So once after that escort mission is done, he goes straight to the American bomber squadron base. I think he rides a bicycle or something, and then he goes there and he has a drink with all the pilots, and then they talk tactics, and then they figure it out there and then what it is that they're doing, what their doctrine is in such a situation, and what should the close escorts do. And basically they come to the agreement that once the enemy is getting stuck in and they're attacking the formation, don't chase the fighters in, because the gunners have very little time to identify who are friends and who are foe, because they're coming at them like really fast, shooting all guns blazing. They're not going to take the time to try to identify. They're going to shoot anybody and everybody that comes into the formation. So for the close escorts, once the enemy fighters are getting stuck in, they just have to let them go. Don't chase them in. And later on, they have the development of the escorts going further away from the formation and intercepting the enemy interceptors before they get to the bombers. That's another whole other story there. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to talk about regarding this book and fighter operations from the Royal Air Force perspective. I will be going more in depth into all the things that I've mentioned here regarding like misconceptions of aerial combat in Second World War, and then look more into like the actual operations of fighters in the Second World War. I'll go do more in depth once I've done more research, because I've still got a very long reading list and a long list of sources that I'm still looking into. But yeah. Thanks for, if you made it this far in the video. Thank you for listening to my yapping. I'll see you in the next video.